Next, violent talk and a violent but hugely popular sport.
There may be better athletes, but not defensive football players that have to go into war tomorrow.
That's New Orleans Saints defensive coordinator Greg Williams last January, firing up players to face the San Francisco 49ers in a playoff game the next day. Documentary filmmaker Sean Pamphilon recorded Williams demanding the get tough approach that might be heard in many locker rooms. But Williams has now admitted he oversaw cash bounties for players who knocked opponents out of games. And in parts of the tape, he clearly targets key San Francisco players, including number 10, Kyle Williams, who'd already had 4 concussions.
We need to find out in the first 2 series of the game, the little wide receiver, number 10, about his concussion. We need to put a lick on him right now.
San Francisco's wide receiver Michael Crabtree was a target as well. He'd been nursing a damaged ligament and ACL in his knee.
We need to decide whether Crabtree wants to be a fake prima donna or he wants to be a tough guy. We need to find that out. He becomes human. Take out that outside ACL.
Williams also zeroed in on 49er tailback Frank Gore.
We've got to do everything in the world to make sure we kill Frank Gore's head. We want him running sideways. We want his head sideways.
Filmmaker Pamphilon says he released it as a warning amid growing concern about head injuries in football at all levels. More now on the tape and larger questions it raises from Dan Lebowitz, Executive Director of the Center on Sports in Society at Northeastern University, and Mike Wise, sports columnist for the Washington Post. He also hosts a sports radio talk show. Dan Lebowitz, I'll start with you. What strikes you most about that tape?
What strikes me most about it is that it goes against everything of the Roger Goodell tenure at the NFL. I mean, Goodell has come in, looked at concussion issues, been responsive to the concussion issues, has tried to establish a code of conduct for that league as if they were, in many respects, what they are, a major brand like IBM. He's leveled fines for excessive hits. He's told people that he was going to establish this code of conduct, and he's held strong to it. So I think in many respects it's a rogue and reprehensible act by certain people, in contrast to what the overall leadership of the league, whether it's from Goodell or owners like Kraft or the Rooneys, there's a strong leadership in the NFL, and it's a great brand, and I think that brand has worked hard to make sure that people respect it and see that brand is carrying a role of responsibility.
All right. Well, Mike Wise, you've been in a lot of locker rooms at the same time and must have heard these kinds of pumping up is what coaches do, especially in a violent sport like football.
Yeah, I think there is a segment of society today saying, Jeff, this is how the sausage is made, and why should we be surprised? But I think it's important to make a clear distinction between, metaphorically speaking, you need to go knock that guy's head off, which we've all heard in locker rooms, and you got to go test somebody's ACL. You have to hit him in the head. Apparently from the audio, the visual involves pointing at a chin, saying you need to get Alex Smith under the chin. These are clear malicious intent to injures. And if you get to that point, I think you step over some lines, some boundaries that all of a sudden are crossed.
But I'll stay with you, Mike. Is the line clear? I mean, that's the question,
well,
right?
And that's a good question, because having talked to Dr. Richard Ellenbogen, one of the top neurologists in the country who's on the NFL's concussion committee, he says that there's a culture change going on. The problem is it's not going on the sideline yet. It's in the owner's offices. It's in Roger Goodell's offices. He can't have his offensive stars being hurt because it hurts his bottom line. But if it's not happening on the sideline, it doesn't matter. And it has to happen on the sideline.
Well, Dan Lebowitz, I mean, you were talking about it, seeing it in the commissioner's office. What about the sideline? What about criticism even in the commissioner's office that they understand it now, but they came late to this concussion problem. And we're responding more out of fear at this point than out of real health concern.
Well, I think that, you know, people generally sometimes have to respond in a reactive fashion given sort of the way society moves and issues that are raised as society moves. I think to Goodell's credit, you can look at it as reactive, but I think that his policies in that reaction have been very proactive. And I think that he has set a clear tenor for the league during his tenure. And I think that it's going to filter down either through fine or through suspensions as he's been levying.
Mike Wise, a lot of money's on the line either way, right? I mean, this is a incredibly profitable sport.
Yeah, and I don't want to demean Roger Goodell and say he doesn't care about the safety of the players. I do think he does. I also think this also happens to be at a time when there are 55 concussion-related lawsuits now filed against the NFL, class action suits that represent over 1,000 players, Jeff. That's millions and millions of dollars. He cannot have his defensive coordinators asking his players to take out other players in the game. It's not healthy for his game's future economically or morally. I mean, the fans will tune off if this keeps happening.
What are you hearing from other players? First, from a week ago and now after this tape.
It's really shocking. There's such a wide variance. Some like there's Chris Kluwe, the punter from Minnesota, is so bothered by this idea that people are outing snitches and the idea that somehow the people who told on them are not looked at as good Samaritans, but people who broke football's code. He's angry about those people. There are other people saying
not about what happened, but about the way it got out.
Yeah, the way it got out. That's the sad part. There are people more concerned in the NFL, players, that are more concerned with the fact who told than who actually is trying to maliciously injure me. That to me is a warped culture.
Now, Dan Lebowitz, speaking of the larger culture here, what do fans? How do fans respond to this? Do you see it having any repercussions?
Well, I think that the spotlight of sport creates such a great platform for discussion about right and wrong, about ethics and a number of other things. So in many respects, the concussion issue, the league's response in terms of leveling fines for hits, hopefully will engage a larger national discussion where people will start thinking about ethics in general, like what is ethical and why aren't we more ethical? And so, these questions could be asked in the political realm, it could be asked in the financial realm, it could be asked elsewhere. But I think it's that great spotlight of sport that allows for a discussion among a much wider audience.
You were nodding your head. You think there's some hope there?
Yeah, I think there's, and not to be utopian about it, but I think at some point, if people do want their children to play football, they allow them to play football, you want to know that it's not about hurting the other guy, that it's about something other than that, and that there's values maintained, and that there's things that happen that go to transcend just knocking another guy out. And if it's not, we understand that the violence is oxygen to football in some ways that will never get away from
and to the fans, right?
And to the fans. You're not going to have a league without big hits. But I think we need to get to a point, and I don't know if Dan agrees with this, that where we celebrate the hard hitters, but we condemn the headhunters. And I know that those lines are very iffy, and it's not clear when you obliterate them, but Greg Williams did, and I think he should be condemned.
All right, brief last word, Dan Lebowitz.
I just think that, in general, Mike's right on point there. A line was crossed, and I think that Greg Williams should be condemned. And I think that condemnation will reverberate throughout society in ways that will be positive.
Dan Lebowitz, Mike Wise, thank you both very much.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.